I'd like to introduce Rachel Pickering, Product Marketing Manager for Imprivata Cortext. Welcome, Rachel. Please take it away.
Thanks, Betsy, and thanks everybody for joining today. So as you know, this is an introduction to our secure communications platform that is purposely designed for healthcare. So I'm going to take a little bit of time to go through some of the specific features and functionality that we think will help solve some of the biggest issues that we see that healthcare struggles with for communication today. Once I go through that, I'll walk through a little bit of what some of our customers are doing uniquely around their secure communications initiatives, and then we should have some time for Q&A at the end. So as you guys know, inefficient communications, it impacts everything, right? We've got this crazy complex network of care teams both inside a hospital and throughout the entire care continuum between clinics and specialty facilities. And more healthcare providers, whether it's a surgeon or a pharmacist or a physician, are being required to stay in constant connection with other members of the care team. Unfortunately, as that web starts to grow out and becomes more complex, any small inefficiency in your communication chain can be compounded and can have downstream impact on the cost of care, right? Wasted time adds cost to care. So there are really three key areas that we think about when we talk about the cost of care and how ineffective communication can affect your organization. First and foremost is just wasted time, right? When you've got a clinician or a nurse who's sitting there waiting for the okay to discharge a patient or waiting for somebody to get back on a quick answer, that takes away from patient care. What we're seeing too is that admission, transfer, and dismissal workflows, those are the three areas where we see it the most. And we've got customers who are wasting around 35 minutes per day for each patient transfer, 35 minutes a day coordinating emergency responses, 35 minutes, 30 minutes for patient admission. And this productivity, this provider's wasting time really starts to add up for your organization. The downstream impact of that is kind of twofold. One of them is obviously care quality issues. When you've got a patient sitting there waiting to get admitted, waiting there to get sent home, it starts to lead to frustration, poor satisfaction. You've also got frustrated, distracted doctors. And then, to avoid that frustration, to avoid that dissatisfaction and speed up these workflows, you end up having clinicians who resort to unsecure methods of communication, whether it's an SMS text. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with patient care and you've got something that maybe involves patient health information, now not only are you unsecure, but you're opening up your organization to potential HIPAA violations. So it's a serious concern when you are not utilizing the most effective methods of communication possible that ripples across the entire care continuum. Here's a really good example that we like to go through, right? So say you have a nurse, and the nurse needs to get in touch with the consulting doctor for a quick question. Maybe you've got a patient who has a rash that seems to be spreading or a burn that you want looked at. It's not urgent, it's not a code, it's not something that requires a direct page or, a phone call. It's just a really quick question. Unfortunately, it's nighttime and the nurse has no visibility into who's actually on call to take a look at this. What happens is that normally they'd have to maybe call the scheduling system and figure out who is on board. Once they know that, they send a page or they reach out in some other way to the clinician, and they have to wait for a response. Sometimes the clinician has to come in because they don't know the context of what the conversation is, and it's a really long, slow workflow. The alternative is, they snap a picture of the rash and they send it over because they happen to know their phone number, and now you've got a HIPAA fine sitting there waiting for you. So this inefficient workflow breeds unsecure, uncompliant, non-compliant workflows. And that's not something that you want to put your healthcare organization into the position of. So that's where Imprivata Cortext comes into play. And Imprivata Cortext allows clinicians within your healthcare organization, whether it's on-site at the hospital, on the go, at home, or at a off-site facility to communicate securely in a HIPAA-compliant manner from any workstation or mobile phone. What you're able to do by implementing this is not only ensure HIPAA compliance, but you can improve provider efficiency, you can become less reliant on outdated, inefficient communication technology that maybe has its place in emergency situations but doesn't make sense for day-to-day communications. And Imprivata Cortext has some really neat ways to help increase adoption and ease deployment, which is something that's really important for healthcare organizations to make sure that they've got everybody in their organization operating under the same platform. Because if you've got people using different things, then you're going to have that breakdown in communication. You're going to go back to those unsecure workflows. So Imprivata boasts some of the highest adoption rates of any of our competitors, and we can walk through a little bit about why that specifically is. With Imprivata, we're able to take that same messaging workflow that we talked about before that led to the non-compliant unsecure messaging of PHI, and we're able to streamline it by creating a one-to-one link between clinicians with a simple, easy, accessible application on their phone or on their computer so they can directly get in touch with whoever's on call or the right clinician, fast access to that care team member. You're going to decrease that response time, cut down on productivity issues. You're going to do it in a HIPAA-compliant way. And it's also a context-rich communication that allows you to get down to the nitty-gritty of what you need to talk about, because ultimately, you know, any time you can save with a clinician is the best alternative. So Imprivata synchronizes communication for clinicians to allow them to coordinate patient care across their workflows. We have a number of things that I want to touch upon, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about them specifically following, but really it's about making sure that anytime, anywhere, your conversations are going to be able to follow you. So it's going to synchronize across your devices. You're going to be able to access the conversations that you started during the morning on your desktop, on your mobile phone while you're out doing rounds, and then when you get home and have to finish your conversations, because let's be serious, a doctor's day is never really done, right? But we also have great flexibility to be able to customize this experience for your different users to make sure that you can make it visible to other folks, you know, what your status is. Are you busy? Are you tied up in surgery? You can change these on your own, block off amounts of time where you want people to know, hey, you know, I'm out of pocket for this period of time, and you can do it in an easy, efficient way. There's also just an alert so that your clinicians can make sure that, you know, something that's going to come through is going to really catch their ear, is going to make sure that they don't ever miss a notification. We have alerts that can change in volume and frequency. We have persistent alerts on the desktop to make sure that it lets you know until you've read that message. And we make it really easy to get in there and talk to the people you know by tying in with your enterprise directory so that you can look people up by name or role or group. You can look people up for a unit or department, and these groups are really granular so you can control who's in them and what they need. When we're talking about just the general texting capabilities, generally speaking, right, if you could send a text message, you can send a Cortext. It's designed to be incredibly efficient and convenient for clinicians. We have a couple of features in there that help you get to the right person more quickly as well, things like tying into your on-call roles schedule to be able to manage that internally directly within the Cortext application. You can do things like one-touch quick responses or callback requests that will enable you to click on a phone number and immediately launch your native dialer so that you can quickly get in touch with somebody. And we also integrate with Nuance for speech recognition as well. And all of this is done in a way that is HIPAA compliant and meets Joint Commission requirements, so you can be sure and feel confident that your communications within your organization are being done in a compliant and safe way. One of the things that I really want to dive into a little bit more deeply, though, is our fast user switching. And this is something that I think is really important, especially for healthcare organizations that want to utilize this heavily with their nurses, or maybe they're using shared devices. So in a lot of scenarios, you might have a shared mobile device within your organization. So a nurse comes in for her shift or his shift, and he comes up and he grabs that phone off the dock, and now that's what he's using throughout the course of his day. Unfortunately, with any mobile application, it's a little tricky to get in there and type in your username and password. If you're passing out phones from one person to the next, it can be a little tricky as well. So what we've done is created this fast user switching where you can simply log in with the scan of a QR code off of your desktop to quickly switch you over to the proper user. So that way when you have multiple clinicians sharing a phone, you're able to make sure that they're always using the right credentials. This also helps streamline, and we'll go into this a little bit more later though, is streamlining that very first login to make sure that you get the applications on your clinicians' phones and get them using it quickly, again, speeding adoption and adding to the success of the project that you're looking to implement on secure messaging. Another really neat thing that we like to talk about is the functionality that we have to support out-of-network recipients. So you may come across times where a clinician wants to or needs to share some sort of patient health information or other information, and unfortunately the recipient that they need to reach out to isn't in your Active Directory or isn't within your enterprise directory. We have a way to also do that to make sure that it is HIPAA compliant so that your providers aren't held up by not being able to communicate with someone critical. So the way this works is it actually sends an encrypted web link to a phone number that you dial in, and that recipient will get this link. They can open it up, they can see the message one time, and then it'll self-destruct, again, to provide HIPAA compliance, and they'll be able to open up a communication chain. The recipient will be able to respond once. They won't be able to go in and continue to send messages again to make sure that that message, that communication stays closed down and HIPAA compliant. And as soon as the clinician responds again, it'll open up a new encrypted link. So all of this information gets directly ported into the physician's application, so that entire communication chain will be available for them within the secure messaging application. And obviously, I know this is something that is really important to folks on the line who are really concerned with HIPAA compliance. We are a HIPAA compliant solution certified by third parties. We have photo messaging capabilities, data encryption that are all tightly encrypted. We also offer some really comprehensive auditing and reporting, as well as archiving configurability to make sure that you guys have the visibility that you need into what's going on within your secure messaging environment, understand which departments are using it the most, where you might see some trouble spots, and then obviously manage to your own organizational mandates. It's SOC 2 Type 1 certified. It's incredibly secure. We have incredible uptimes, as well as a number of different ways to manage statuses of updates or anytime there might be, a push to the application so that you guys are well aware of what's going on. And then finally, from a management standpoint, we've got a number of built-in policy enforcement tools that will allow you, again, to make sure that the application that you're using in your environment is tailored to your own internal mandates and policies. We have things like app-level pin lock if you want to use on a personal phone to make sure that if somebody's using this, there's 2 factors to get in there. We have the ability to make it so that only certain clinicians have desktop-only access. So if you don't want certain people, maybe it's a PA, to be able to carry those conversations outside of the hospital, you can give them desktop-only access. You can also do things like manage the application, so in the event a phone is lost, you can delete a user or disable and make sure that there's no concern of having PHI outside at risk. So these are all things that you can do directly from within your admin console center that really help manage and quickly mitigate any concerns. And then there's the fast adoption with Imprivata Cortext that I want to get into a little bit. So like I mentioned, Imprivata Cortext has an incredibly high adoption rate. And one of the big differentiators is the ease of enrollment that we offer through our tight integration with Imprivata OneSign. What we're able to do is streamline the enrollment process and make it really simple on clinicians so that they can, again, they go quickly into their desktop, they log in, all of a sudden you take a quick picture of the QR code, you're able to scan in, get that up and running on your own personal phone, and get clinicians using it more quickly, more readily, with less work on your side. With this auto-enrollment, it also ties closely to your directory or your AD credentials to be able to provision your users ahead of time to make sure that you can manage who has access to which license types all directly within the admin console. So it makes it really easy for you guys so that you can start seeing that return on investment a little bit more quickly. So as I mentioned, I want to walk through a little bit of what our customers are doing today, because secure messaging is pretty standard throughout healthcare, right? Everybody knows that you need something. People are starting to figure out what they want to use. I think one of the biggest things is trying to standardize on something to make sure that all of your healthcare providers are operating in the same realm, not only to make it more secure for you, but also to make it more convenient for them. So we've got a number of customers who have been able to experience some really tangible benefits through the use of Imprivata Cortext. Buford Memorial is one of them, where they were able to see a direct increase in provider productivity through time savings by being able to cut down on the amount of time that clinicians were waiting for admissions and dismissal. Atlantic Healthcare was able to see even more. Right? They were able to cut down on communications between different members of their staff, whether it was pharmacy to provider or nurse to physician. They were able to see an 88% improvement in physician response times to questions. That is huge. That is saving, hours a day that can be spent on patient care. And Community Health and Wellness actually has a really interesting story that I encourage you to take a look at on our website, where they were able to improve their HCAHPS scores by using Imprivata Cortext as the primary means for day-to-day communication and really cut down on all of the unnecessary overhead paging noise that was going on in the hospital. So they're able to streamline that and not only make it more efficient for our clinicians, but make life a little bit more comfortable for the patients who are sitting in your hospital as well. Now I want to go through a couple of unique workflows, though. Like I mentioned, secure messaging is wide known throughout the healthcare industry, but we have a few customers who are doing something a little bit different or a little bit more unique that I'd like to highlight in order to make sure that you guys are looking at this and getting the most value from Imprivata Cortext as possible. So one of them is admitting, right? I talked about this a lot. Admitting is where patients and clinicians often spend some of the most wasted time trying to move a patient from intake to the right clinician. So we have one customer, a specific trauma center, who is able to use Cortext to send group messages to the on-shift hospitalist to request a consult. And what they're able to do is, instead of reaching out to one clinician and say, hi, are you available to take this consult? Oh, no, I'm in surgery. Okay, now I have to find the next one. Hey, are you available? I have a patient who's experiencing this. No, I'm sorry, I'm tied up with another patient. Going one by one, trying to go through that list and figure out who the right person is to talk to. Now they're able to send this group message. They're all able to see it, and the right person will be able to chime in and say, hey, I'm on call, I'm available, let me run down and take a look at this patient. They'll make the admission decision, and now the patient's on the way. So it's more time spent on patient care, less time running around trying to find clinicians, which means moving patients through faster, which leads to better patient care, better patient satisfaction, and an overall better experience for everybody. Pharmacy to provider communication is another huge one. I actually mentioned this with Atlantic Health, where they were able to cut down on the amount of time it took clinicians to reach out to pharmacy for order reconciliation by about 45 minutes. So what we had was, and this happens in every hospital, right? There's a situation where a provider maybe orders 12 milligrams of something that only comes in 10 milligrams, or they order something that's out of stock and they want to find out if it's okay to use a generic version. The pharmacist has to find a way, that order comes in, they have to take a look at it, realize that something needs to be changed or realize that there's a concern. They then have to track down the clinician, get on the phone with them, have a conversation, get the clinician to go back in the system, replace the order. It's incredibly time-consuming, especially when you've got a physician who's running around, hard to get a hold of, hard to get the full message across, right? So what they were able to do is now they took this communication workflow away from their inefficient workflows and moved it to Imprivata Cortext so they could send a quick context-rich message to this provider, hey, you ordered this, we only have this. Is it okay? If not, please redo the order. The clinician is able to immediately see what they need to do, jump on a computer, replace an order, or verify what they were looking for, and move on with the day. So again, it's saving time for the pharmacists waiting to sit there and put out an order. Patients are getting the medication they need faster, and clinicians are spending less time running around trying to find an answer. Communication of incoming trauma cases is another one where we have a health system who is utilizing Imprivata Cortext to speed care for some of the most critical patients. What they're able to do is remove the need for overhead pagers. Instead of waiting for a trauma to come in and sending out a page to say sort of all hands on deck, everybody get down here, and you have all these clinicians sitting there waiting at the emergency department bay, waiting for that patient to come in. Now they're able to give timely step-by-step updates to say, hey, patient is 10 minutes out. Everybody start to get activated. We're going to need you down here in 10 minutes. Hey, patient is here. Make sure that you guys are where you need to be. Hey, patient has moved through the emergency department and is now in room 211. Can you make sure to follow up there? So you're cutting down on staff wandering around waiting for a patient. You're cutting down on a patient waiting for clinicians to get to where they need to be at time. Confusion is reduced, and you're able to really quickly move this patient through to getting the care that they need. One of the ways that they really leverage this is through the notifications within Imprivata Cortext so that they could immediately see who's read that message. If for some reason somebody critical hadn't read it, now they can utilize some of those other ways like the overhead paging or something else to make sure that they get to whoever they need to as quickly as possible. Another one is utilizing our out-of-network messaging to send updates to family members. This one is, I think, a really unique way that a couple of our customers are utilizing this to improve the experience that their patients' caregivers have. We have one customer who uses it to update patients at the Children's Hospital, and they use it to update the patient's parents or caregivers and loved ones on the status of the surgery. So no longer are clinicians having to leave the operating room or nurses having to come out and find a patient family to give them updates on non-critical pieces. They're able to pre-register them in Cortext using the out-of-network messaging application to send them things like simple status updates that shouldn't be taken away from patient care. Obviously, there are always scenarios where a doctor needs to talk to a family member in person, and so in those scenarios, they're able to cut down on that time as well by saying, hey, just so you know, the doctor will be able to talk to you in 10 minutes. Please make sure you're there. And what this does is it gives the patients flexibility to be able to not be tied to that waiting room chair, right? Because now they can get that heads up about when the doctor can talk to them. It reduces anxiety because they're able to get more frequent status updates without having to have someone leave the OR. And ultimately, it lets to improve patient satisfaction scores within this health system. One of the other things that we like to talk about is the way that Imprivata Cortext can expand throughout the entire healthcare information ecosystem. So it's not just secure messaging. We integrate with on-call scheduling. We integrate with medical speech recognition. We have API integrations that also can work into different clinical collaboration and workflow management so that you can route all of the communications that you need through Imprivata Cortext, again, standardizing on where your clinicians know to look for these secure communications, where they know to look for any sort of communication so that you can make sure that people don't start using unsecure methods. In order to achieve this, we work with a number of integration partners. I won't go through them all for sake of time, but we do work with a number of partners. If this is something that kind of sparks your eye, we'd be happy to follow up with more information on exactly what we do to work with these folks as well. Imprivata, if you're not familiar with us, we are a trusted market leader with over 1,700 customers in healthcare around the world. We have 6 million care providers who are utilizing Imprivata in one way or another to save time and streamline the workflows within their environment. And we've been around in a while, so if you guys have any questions about Imprivata in general or about best practices for healthcare or what we see our customers doing, please let us know. And with that, I will open it up to you for questions. Betsy?
Thanks, Rachel. If you haven't yet, please enter your questions into the question panel on the right of your screen. And Rachel, I do see that we have a few that have come in. Here's one. What are the most common use cases that you see for out-of-network messaging?
Sure, that's a good question. So we talked about when clinicians are using out-of-network messaging to keep patient families apprised of what's going on. That's one of the most common ones we see. The other one is, a good example is when a clinician who maybe has privileges at a hospital and is part of a specific hospital's directory also works in an outside clinic, and they work with a care team who's dealing with a patient at that outside clinic. You know, if not everybody from that care team has privileges at the hospital, they might not be within the Cortext directory, but maybe that clinician wants to reach out to somebody else at the care team from the clinic to verify something or to share a status on the patient of an ongoing case. They're now able to do that in a HIPAA-compliant manner.
Thank you. Here's another one. Can you go into more detail on how the silent override functionality works?
Sure. You know, I had that on the slide, and I don't think I went into too much detail about it. I kind of glazed over it. But silent override is really, it's a neat feature, and it's one of the ones that allows us to more granularly control the experience that we as an end user have with the application. So I say that I use Cortext every day, right? So silent override mode allows you to ensure that if you accidentally leave your phone on silent, if you want, those Cortext messages will still continue to come through in an auditable alert. The way that's done is through a specific setting on the end user's phone where you can let it know, I would like to override silent mode for urgent messages or standard messages. You can decide which one you want. You can set unique tones. You can make sure that the alerts are persistent to make sure that you don't ever miss a notification. Imprivata Cortext is the only application right now that does that for both Android and iOS. Some other folks do it just for Android, but we enable this functionality for both Android and iOS to make sure that no matter where you are, whatever kind of care environment, that information, that notification is going to come through for you.
And folks, just a reminder, We have more questions, but if you have a question, please enter it into the question panel on the right of your screen. Here's another one, Rachel. How can I access my Cortext messages from my home computer?
That's a good question. So I mentioned that Imprivata has mobile and desktop applications. We also have a web application. So if you've got a home computer and you realize that you've got to get in and look at a conversation or maybe respond to something and you're not near your phone, we have a web application that you can log into. So it doesn't have to be something that's installed on your desktop. And you can go in and access that from anywhere.
I think we have time for a couple more. How does the sender know if a message is delivered versus read? And can they tell which recipients have read a message when sending to a group?
Sure. So it's a really simple way to take a look at that within the Cortext application. If you guys take a look at a demo with one of our sales team, they'll be able to walk you through that. But we have delivery and read receipt timestamps for everything that gets sent through. So we'll be able to let you know the exact time that a message was delivered to somebody else's application, as well as the exact time that it was opened. When you're dealing with something like a group message on the front, what you'll be able to see is, 1 out of 3 people have read this message, or 2 out of 3 people, and it's a simple click of a button. It's actually a little envelope that now looks open, where you can click on that and it'll tell you exactly who read the messages at exactly which time, so you can tell the difference between the different group members.
And here's one more. Who manages groups for the group messaging?
Sure. So groups can be managed both on an ad hoc level by the end users. They're able to create their own groups that only they can see. So if you want quick access to a specific care team or a group of folks who you communicate with regularly, you can create those groups yourself. Alternatively, the administrators can create global groups on the back end. Say you want a floor 4 group or nursing group or cardiology group or whatever it may be, they can also create those groups, and those are something that are visible and accessible to everybody.
Well, Rachel, I think that's it on the questions for today. Thank you. Great presentation. And thank you to everyone for joining us for today's discussion. And we hope you join us again in the future for our new webinars.